Hi and welcome, week 10 of our revision guide. So I'm going to try and spam out 3 videos this week. I'm going to do one a night and bosh them out for you. And I'm trying to keep them as short as possible. So we've done American West, Western through time. We're going to focus on Elizabethan England. Okay, so these are our 3 sections, and this first bit today I'm going to do about the Queen herself, when she first became Queen, and the features of her government. I'm going to do religion tomorrow because that's quite a complicated area. So these are the questions you have in the exam. So remember, you're going to have the American West paper first. So the Elizabethan questions will start on question 4. Describe 2 features of, pretty straightforward. The next question is explain why, 12 marks, a knowledge question. Then you've got this big question, the 16 marker, where they'll give you a statement and say, how far do you agree? But the good thing about this, they'll give you a choice. So that's going to be really helpful. So they could have, and you could do this for homework, you could work on the question below. So religion was Elizabeth's main problem when she became queen. How far do you agree? And as I keep saying, they always give you 2 things. So the religious settlement or the Puritans. But in order to get level 4, you must use information of your own. So on this features question, so it could be explain 2 features of Elizabeth's government. So the first part of her government was the court, the nobles. So their job was to advise the queen and basically be sort of like pretty and posh, display their wealth and power. And within the court, there were some important people called Lord Lieutenants, and these, believe it or not, still exist today. So we have a Lord Lieutenant of Canada, and basically their role was to kind of govern English counties. So we'd have a Lord Lieutenant of Devon. Privy Council. Oh my God, the cat's just jumped on me. Gave me a heart attack. Hello. So number 2, Privy Council. So this again still exists today. And their role, they were kind of senior nobles, and their role was to govern the country and provide. Get off my. She's eating my chocolate now. Get off and provide security and law and order for England. Okay, she's gone. Okay, number 3, Parliament. We know this. Parliament's made of the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and their role, and still is this role, is to pass laws and approve taxes. So Elizabeth's power was kind of limited by Parliament in a way. It didn't look like that. Number 4, JPs, Justices of the Peace. They played an important role. They were normally very rich, wealthy landowners, and really their role was to provide law and order and were kind of judges in courts. So pretty straightforward question. They may also ask this question here, explain 2 features of Elizabethan society. So the difference here is between the countryside and towns. So the vast majority of people in the countryside were poor, homeless, vagrants, and just working the land. A smaller group were farmers, so you had 2 groups here, tenant farmers who rented, or yeoman farmers who owned a small part of land. And the minority, the top sort of 1-2%, were the very rich, so you had the gentry, you had small estates, and then you had the huge landowners, the earls, the dukes, and the lords. So again, that still exists today, depressingly, in 2019. In the towns, we've got, again, the majority were poor, unskilled, often unemployed and very seasonal. So, maybe a couple of weeks of work and then nothing. Underneath, or above them, sorry, should have done this the other way around, but above them were the businesses. So people like tailors and goldsmiths who had a real particular skill. And then the kind of toffs at the top were lawyers, doctors, and the clergy, and the very wealthy merchants who were the traders in each town. So again, that's pretty straightforward. Okay, explain why. So they could have a question like this on the 4B question. Explain why Elizabeth faced problems when she first became queen in 1588. So this is pretty easy. She was quite young, 21. So 21, and she was young, lacked experience. And what a big issue for her was, obviously she was the daughter of Anne Boleyn. So a little recap there. So obviously Henry VIII divorced Catherine of Aragon and set up the Church of England so he could marry Anne Boleyn. So their child was Elizabeth. So many people, particularly number 3, Catholics, did not believe that she had a legitimate claim to the throne, because technically, according to them, she had never divorced. She wasn't the actual legitimate. Anne Boleyn was not the legitimate wife of Henry. So how logically, therefore, could Elizabeth be the legitimate ruler? Can't speak. Number 4. The other issue was she was brought up a Protestant, and again, this angered Catholics. She was unmarried, and I'll talk about that on the right hand side in a minute. And she needed the support of Parliament, which was quite difficult. Parliament was basically old men who weren't going to listen to a younger woman going in. Number 7, I should have put number 7 there. She needed money. So, marriage. Now, obviously, this was before Tinder. Would have helped him enormously. So she couldn't marry a Protestant because this would anger Catholics. She couldn't marry a Catholic because this would upset Protestants. What about if she married a Spanish prince? Well, she couldn't do that because it would upset the French and possibly start a war. She couldn't marry a French prince because it would upset the Spanish and start a war. So, very difficult. Why not marry an English guy? All went round in circles and circles. But obviously, behind all of this, she herself, and she knew this deep down, needed to have an heir to really get rid of this legitimacy question once and for all. And ideally, obviously, a male heir, a son, that would kind of put a lot of these problems to bed. But it became a bit of an issue, and inevitably, as you know, she became known as the Virgin Queen and didn't marry at all. Okay, next possible question is this one here. Explain why. So why did Elizabeth have advantages when she became queen? So this is kind of the flip of the previous one. So she was actually, if she was on LinkedIn here, she would actually be a pretty good candidate for the job. So she's apparently very charismatic, very charming person to meet, very well educated to speak loads of different languages, Latin, Greek, French, all these different languages, apparently highly intelligent. She also understood politics, how to play people. So she particularly used her patronage. So patronage means is kind of giving, doing people favours, promising them things if she helped them out. You scratch my back, I scratch your back sort of thing. So she really understood the game she was playing, the game of politics. She was also benefiting from number 4 there, where there was an increasing number of Protestants in England, and obviously that was growing her power base because Protestants wanted to have a Protestant queen, and she was an incredibly resilient person. So on a personal level, she was actually, a really good queen and a really good candidate, but she faced a huge amount of challenges. She also really understood the power of propaganda. So particularly, there was no cameras or photography at this time, particularly sort of commissioned lots of paintings. So there's famous paintings there. The Armada portrait showing the Spanish Armada, the Ditchley portrait where she's standing on England and, showing her power, wealth, all those kinds of things. So everything on these portraits were, shown. And there were lots of copies were made in all different castles and manors all around England to show that she was the boss. Okay, probably the most confusing and the most detailed, so I'll just slow down here a little bit. So these are the financial problems that she faced. Okay, so a little bit of a recap. Why was England in such a terrible financial state? Well, primarily, England was in debt, particularly to foreign banks, particularly in Belgium, and they were charging incredibly high interest rates. Previous Tudors, because there'd been all kinds of wars for power, had sold royal land to get money to pay for soldiers, etc. And this obviously inevitably meant that they had less rental income. And they also decided to do something called debasing the currency. Now, what that means is, if you can see from the picture there, like coins were literally made from gold or silver. And what they decided to do was reduce the amount of silver or gold. And inevitably, this made the money less valuable, which made inflation or prices increase. So that's quite a confusing point. But what they were trying to do there was kind of like they had a set amount of gold, they were trying to spread it over more money, and effectively the value of that money decreased. So how could Elizabeth raise money? Well, she could get rents from her lands, but obviously a lot of that had been sold off. She could try and raise taxes, but obviously Parliament would have to be persuaded of that through duties or subsidies. She could get fines from JPs, or she could borrow more money, but she's afraid to do that because of the interest rates. So what could she do? So her solutions were she could raise taxes, but Parliament would need to agree. And hey, who wants a tax rise? Nobody. It was incredibly unpopular. Probably not the best idea to do if you're first coming into power as a decision. She could try and get a bit more confidence in the currency by improving the gold quality and increasing the gold content to try and reduce the inflation. But people at the time thought this would be really confusing. Should we use the old coins, the new coins, blah, blah, blah. So they didn't decide to do that. So what did she do? Well, very sensibly, I think she did not raise taxes. She decided to cut her own expenses in half and sold more land. And it wasn't dent-free. Debt-free, I should say, I might change that. Debt-free by 1574. Okay. Last question. Explain why Elizabeth faced challenges abroad. So this is confusing. We're going to go into a lot more detail about this later on. So remember, the old enemies of England are France, Scotland, and Spain. So France was a big problem for England because one, it had more money, two, it had a bigger population, and three, our old friend Mary Queen of Scots was married to Francis I, the King of France. Okay, so we're going to do a lot more about Mary Queen of Scots later on, but France was obviously our closest neighbour, but also our classic adversary. Can't say that word. Our classic enemy. That's a lot easier. So Scotland. So Scotland, obviously, borders England again. We fought, wars for many, many years. And what was going on was there. Mary Queen of Scots was in France with her husband. So Mary of Guise was ruling Scotland, and she literally brought French soldiers to Scotland. Now, for Elizabeth, this was a nightmare because obviously, basically, there was French soldiers in the north in Scotland, and obviously French soldiers across the border. So this was a big, big problem. Number three, wars were expensive. So obviously Elizabeth didn't have much money, so the last thing she wanted was a war. The other issue is that France had just ended its war with Spain, and there was a concern that they'd unify in a sort of double Catholic kind of threat to attack Protestant England. And England had just lost Calais, which traditionally had been controlled and fought over by the English for many hundreds of years. So that's a big problem. So what did she do? Well, very sensibly, again, she signed a treaty with the French called the Treaty of Troyes, beautiful place in France, where basically she conceded that the French could own Calais, and obviously that's the case today. She decided when Mary Queen of Scots left Scotland, which again we'll look at later, to put her in custody so she knew where she was, so she couldn't get involved in any revolts or anything like that. So the only threat was Spain, and we kind of know what's going to happen there. So I'm going to ping up another video tomorrow looking at the more confusing topic of religion. So that will help you. So obviously the information of your own there is going to be obviously threats from abroad, which we've just talked about, her financial problems that she's just talked about. So there's a huge amount on this question that you could talk about. I'll look at the religious settlement tomorrow and the problem with the Puritans and Catholics, etc., etc. So I'll ping this up now and do another one tomorrow.